A little over a year ago, I filmed a video where I offered people tips on what to do if there's a grail that they've set their sights on, but they've been unable to get it for one reason or another. And recently, another subscriber actually reached out to me by the name of Too Many Hobbies, and he asked a very similar question. And on the surface of it, I felt like I answered that question with that previous video. But the more that I thought about it, I realized that he was actually asking a slightly different question. It wasn't about a grail that you cannot get. It was more about a grail that you've been able to get, but not quite at the grade that you want. Is that something that you should pursue? Is that something that you should do? And I've been noodling. I've been thinking about it over the last day or so. And so in this video, I actually want to offer up some practical tips, at least tips that I believe are going to be practical to help people to kind of think through, do they buy a lower grade book than the one that they are actually after? Stay tuned for the video. Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. In this video, we are going to spend some time talking about some practical tips related to the pursuit of Grail comics. And specifically, we're going to talk about whether you should get that Grail comic at a lower grade than the grade or condition that you were originally targeting. And so, like most of my videos, I'm not going to necessarily tell you what to do, but I am going to give you a couple of things to consider, a few things to actually think about so that you can actually make up your mind and decide what's the best course of action for you. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into these tips. The first tip, or question I should say, that you have to ask yourself is what makes this particular book, this particular grail, important to you? I think that you have to take some time to ask yourself that question and actually answer it. Why are you going after this book? What makes this book important to you? Is it about the grade? Is it about the story? Is it about the creator? Is it about the art? Is it about the story? Why do you want this book? And I think that if you can ask yourself some pretty tough questions and ultimately answer these questions as to why, I think that you're actually in a better position to be able to determine whether grade actually matters. Because in some cases, grade actually does matter, right? Grade absolutely matters. But if this is, for example, your favorite creator, and it is a really expensive book, and you've been saving your money to buy this book, then it might make sense to just buy the book at that particular grade. If you are buying this book because of, you wanting to resell this book, then maybe the grade matters or doesn't matter, again, depending upon what you're trying to do. But you first have to kind of ask yourself, why this book? Why am I buying it? Why is this grade or this condition important to my long-term or really short-term goals for this particular comic? Very much related to that first tip is the idea of why now. Why are you buying this book right now? What is the rush? Are the prices of this particular book on the upswing? Are they dramatically increasing? Or are you anticipating something to happen down the line that will dramatically increase the value of this book? The reason I'm asking this is because there almost seems in many cases to be a sense of urgency to do something. And that sense of urgency can either be external or internal, right? If there are external things, like there is a pending movie that is about to be announced, then that could have an impact. If there is a movie that's been released and that character has a first appearance or some kind of appearance in that, or points to this character appearing in a future movie, that could be a sign that maybe you need to take some action sooner rather than later before that book continues to increase in value and gets further out of your reach. But if the angst that you're feeling is more internal, I want this book now because I want it, or this money that I just received from my tax return or whatever it happens to be is burning a hole in my pocket, then maybe that's not the best motivator to inspire you to buy the book right now. So you kind of have to ask yourself again, why this book, right? Which was the first question. But then the second point is why now? Why must it be done now? Is it internal? Is it external? And are those factors truly valid? The next tip that I want to offer is that you should probably take some time to evaluate exactly how much your money can buy right now. If you decide that you want to buy the book right now, how much money have you saved up? How much money can you put your hand on? And what does that really get you in terms of the overall grade and condition of the book that you're going after? A lot of times I think we have these preconceived notions of a grade or condition that we want to get, but it's not really tied to a dollar amount because we haven't actually taken the time to do the research to find out how much that grade actually costs, right? Whether you're talking about a raw or a graded book. I think that it's very important to ask ourselves, at this grade, how much does that book realistically cost? And I don't think, honestly, it is as simple as going to eBay and looking at prices there. I think that we have to take some time to actually do some real research by looking at some pricing services, whether they be raw or graded. I think that you have to take the time to do the research to figure out how much is this book actually going for on the open market by looking at the GPA or the FMV of that particular book. The other thing that we probably have to do is to go outside of where we might normally go to look for books. I think that it's very easy for us to jump on eBay and to look at prices there and to think that that is the going rate for that particular book, what we see on eBay. That isn't always the case, right? eBay is one marketplace. It is a single marketplace. It is a large one, don't get me wrong, but it is also not the only way. It is not the only place that we can secure books. And so that leads me to another point, that you have to make sure that you are exhausting the opportunities, that you are going where the books might be, and you're trying to figure out whether your dollar can go a little further by not going to eBay, by maybe going to an antique store or a pawn store or an auction site. That is not eBay. Going to a private dealer, going to a private seller. There are, in many, many cases, thousands of copies of books. Not all of them are only on eBay. So figure out what your money can buy, and then cast the wide net to see where that book might be. Don't just assume that you can only buy it on eBay and pull the trigger there, because you might actually overpay if you're doing that. Another important fact to consider as you're evaluating what your money can actually buy is you need to think about the range that exists for that particular grade. And what I mean by that is that you can have two books that are essentially a 5.0, for example, and they can look dramatically different. A 5.0 can look very, very different. I mean, you could have one that is a little rough, and you could have one that actually presents quite nicely. And the reason for that is that there are lots of defects that can affect the grade of a comic. If you're talking about graded comics, that is. There are a lot of defects that can be the reason why that book received the grade that it did. It's not just one thing and always that one thing. So my point is that you have to look at what grade you can buy and then look at the range of conditions within that given grade. And I'll actually expand upon that idea here in just a moment. So I recently had an opportunity to buy AF-15. And by an opportunity, I mean someone actually offered me a good price for AF-15, and I actually turned it down. And there's a couple of reasons for it. Truth be told, I didn't have the money. didn't have the money to actually buy it. So that's like part one. Part two is it was an ugly book. And I kid you not, it was a 2.0 that was ugly. And it's one of those situations where the book that you really want for your collection actually presents itself at a fair price and you actually turn it down. And again, the reason for that is that I've actually seen AF-15 at a 1.8 that look better than this book. I've certainly seen 2.0s that actually look better than this book. The point is that even though the book is in front of you, even though the opportunity presents itself, sometimes you actually have to say no because it's the right thing to do. I can tell you for a fact that had I bought that book, I would have stared at that book for the next decade or whatever and regretted that decision because I settled. I settled for the ugly book. Don't catch a brick. So I mentioned this point earlier in the video, but I want to remind you of the fact that eBay is not the only place that you can actually pick up comics. There are lots of ways. I've done several videos here on the channel where I've actually spoken about Instagram. There are more and more people that are actually selling comics on Instagram than there were this time 2 years ago, or even a year ago for that matter. There are Facebook groups where comics are sold and bought. There are local meetups and swaps. There are local cons. There are local dealers that you can actually reach out to. You can also go to a local comic shop. There are lots and lots of places where you can actually pick up some pretty awesome comics. So don't just buy the first comic that presents itself when you have that cash in hand. Take a moment, do some research, find the right book so that you do not regret your decision. One of the other things that I would encourage you to do is to look at the delta. To look at the delta between the amount of money that you have saved now, the book that is in front of you, versus the better book that you want to get. Look at the delta in terms of how those two books present and also what that dollar amount is between those two books. And ask yourself, if you were to buy this lesser grade book that is in front of you right now, would that make you happy? Would that book satisfy your desires for that comic? And if not, and you realize through your analysis that the delta isn't significant, then you have to ask yourself, can you take the time to close that delta? Can you take the time to save up the money between the book in front of you and the book that you want in a couple of weeks or months, right? Is it a few bucks or is it a few $1,000 or a lot more, right? What is the delta? Can you make that delta up by taking some time to save some money or maybe even sell some comics that you don't really want for the book that you do want? Can you close that gap so that when you pull the trigger, you actually pick up a book that will satisfy your wants, needs, and desires for that particular comic? One of the things that I oftentimes hear people say is that I'm going to buy this book now, but I'm going to upgrade it later. And I don't know if that actually ever happens. Maybe it does. Maybe people do buy a book that they don't really want and they upgrade that book a little bit later. Maybe it does happen. I, to some degree or another, kind of struggle with that. Personally, whenever I've bought a book, I've tried to buy the best book that I could buy. And I have had aspirations, even with that, of upgrading that book at a later date. And I'm going to be honest, I haven't ever truly done it like on purpose, where I will purposefully buy this book at a low grade and then purposefully sell that book or whatever and then upgrade that to a better book later on. I've never actually done it. Like, I've bought books, not totally happy with the grade, and then I'm just buying another book and kept both of them. Or I've had a book that I didn't really love the grade, or I felt like I could have a better grade, and I've sold that book and then not bought that book, right? So I personally struggle with that, but maybe you are that kind of person that can buy it and then upgrade it. But you have to ask yourself, if you settle for this particular book because you've got to have it now, will you actually upgrade it? And the next part of that is, do you actually have a plan? Do you actually have a plan to go from the book that you bought that you don't really want to the book that you do want, right? Do you actually have a plan of how to make that happen? Or is it more of, I have a theory of doing it, I have a hope, a want, a desire to do it? Do you really have a plan? The last thought that I have on this topic is, what's the rush, right? If there are no external factors that are driving the purchase of this particular book, is there anything wrong with delaying the gratification of having that book in your collection? Is there anything wrong with waiting? One of the hardest things for collectors to do, I think, is to have a book in front of them and not buy that book. I think that is an extremely hard thing for us to do. But I can tell you, one of the potentially most empowering things that you can do is to actually say no, to actually not buy that book that is in front of you if it's not the book that you really want. There is something empowering with saying no and walking away and then really going after something that you want that will make you happy, because I feel like the payoff is much greater with that than buying a book that you're not completely happy with. So why not wait? What is the harm? What could actually go wrong if you don't decide to buy a book? And again, this is making the assumption that there's no external factors and things like that that are driving up prices, right? Why not wait and see what could happen? So there you have it. Those are some of my practical tips. As you're watching this video, you may have had some thoughts on your own. Maybe there's some things that you've employed that have actually worked for you. Maybe you've purchased a book that you didn't really want and you actually upgraded it, or you didn't. But if you have thoughts, and if you think that those thoughts could help me or help someone else out there watching this video, I definitely want to encourage you to leave those comments in the comment section. That way we can continue learning from one another. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects, or you can send me an email to Reggie@regiecollects.com. Take care.